we aim to supplant and replace the Liberal Democrats, and we will be the third biggest party in British politics. That is the task ahead of us.
The SNP government says it will flesh out the details of EU membership this time next year. Alex Salmond's announcement came as Holyrood opposition leaders pounced on comments made by the European Commission President, which seems to suggest an independent Scotland might have to reapply to join the club. EU officials have been stressing that they don't want to comment on specific situations in member states. Here's STV's political editor, Bernard Ponsonby.
If Scotland votes for independence, would it automatically assume EU membership, or would it need to apply? Comments from the President of the European Commission, José Manuel Barroso, appear to suggest Scotland would need to apply.
To join the European Union, yes, we have a procedure. It's a procedure of international law. A state has to be a democracy, first of all, and the state has to apply to become a member of the European Union, and all the other member states have to give their consent.
And the consequences of those comments? Well, cue cross swords at question time.
The new state of Scotland would first have to apply to be a member of the European Union and, if successful, adopt the euro as our currency. The First Minister doesn't have any legal advice which contradicts the President of the EU Commission, does he?
There have to be negotiations, as I've pointed out in this chamber before, but the crucial point is that these negotiations take place from within the context of the European Union.
The First Minister said that the Scottish Government will set out its legal advice on EU membership in a year's time. The Scottish Liberal Democrat leader speculated on the consequences of Scotland not automatically assuming membership.
And if voters opt for independence, they may well find out that we've lost the rebate, we're forced to join the euro, and the Schengen Agreement. That's the reality. That's the consequence. That's the consequence if the First Minister is wrong.
European officials are wary about being drawn into answering specifics about Scotland and indeed Catalonia. Their respective positions within unified states would at least raise a legal question for Europe. Alex Salmond disagrees with opponents on what would happen.
Joining us now from Edinburgh is the SNP MSP Christine Graham, and here with me in the studio is the Labour MSP Drew Smith. Christine Graham, SNP is asserting that Scotland would automatically remain within the EU, but it's far from clear that that is a certainty.
Well, you know, this is, of course, it's scaremongering. We expect this from the Unionists. But if you look at this, one, presumption being made here is that in Scotland's independence, the United Kingdom would just go on as before, as if it was the same legal entity. And of course it wouldn't. We would have a rump of the United Kingdom or the remainder of the United Kingdom. So what would happen, because Scotland is a nation and England is a nation, it was a voluntary arrangement with the Union of the Crowns and then the Union of the Parliaments, these two nations would remain bound up by all the commitments that were given by the first legal entity, which was the United Kingdom. But the idea, which really is ridiculous, is that Scotland becoming independent, the United Kingdom sort of stays the same and just goes on, which is nonsense, of course, arrant nonsense.
Christine, what evidence do you have to support that, though?
Well, it's a fact.
That Scotland would automatically remain in the EU?
No, please follow the logic. If Scotland does become independent, it therefore follows logically that what remains is not the United Kingdom, but something else, the rump of the United Kingdom. So you have two parts that were once whole. And these two parts will have inherited the obligations, the duties and the rights of the original whole. So, I mean, what's being missed in all this argument somehow is the arrogance of the Unionists that Scotland becomes independent and the United Kingdom remains the same. No, it doesn't.
Let's bring Drew Smith in here. What concrete evidence do you have to the contrary of what Christine's saying?
Thanks, Rona. I mean, I think it's interesting that Christine Graham talks about the arrogance of the unionist case for questioning the SNP assertions in this.
No,
and from the package, we've seen that fracas in Parliament, the fracas in Parliament today, and it's good to go back and remember what really is the root of that. And what is at the root of it is that right now, today, the Scottish Government are spending taxpayers' money, taking legal action to prevent them publishing, to prevent them confirming whether or not they even have legal advice to base their assertions on, that Scotland would continue automatically.
What's your evidence?
Well, I think at best, what we now know from what President Barroso has said is that Scotland's membership of the European Union after a successful referendum on independence is uncertain. We don't know. So for the SNP to continually assert that independence would mean nothing would change and that things would all develop in the way that they want them to develop is just simply not true. And the real scandal here is that the SNP government are spending taxpayers' money stopping us getting to the bottom of whether or not they even have legal advice.
Christine, isn't the bottom line that Christine, in terms of international law, it's not clear because there is no historical precedence?
Well, President Barroso has backtracked like mad, and he has not said what was said in the Parliament, and he's backtracked, and so have the rest of the European commissioners. It's been plain for a long time.
I can't see where President Barroso has backtracked at all.
May I finish? May I finish? The second point to be made about this is that legal advice, which the Labour Party are clamouring for, when I asked for that, I mean, Drew Smith wasn't in Parliament then, but when I asked for that from Labour ministers, on several occasions I was told they do not publish legal advice. There's a protocol which they would adhere to, and suddenly now they want to see the legal advice. Westminster doesn't publish legal advice. This is a false...
Can I just answer that very specific point?
Let's pause here a second.
Thrown at independence.
OK, let's just pause here and let's broaden the discussion and talk about the principle of EU membership. And we're now going to go to Nigel Farage in London, I hope. Yes, Nigel, thanks for joining us this evening. You believe that neither Britain nor an independent Scotland should be in the EU, don't you?
Well, I think, for too long the Scottish debate's been a false one, because the argument has been that an independent Scotland could be a member of the EU, and we're only arguing about whether they have to reapply or not. You cannot be an independent country and a member of the European Union. I've made that argument for some years, but forget about me. Yesterday, in his State of the Union speech, for the first time, the F word was used. It is going to become a federal Europe. Mr. Barroso was clear. Democracy can no longer exist at a national level. It must be transferred to a European level. And today, another plan's come out for there to be a central treasury to set budget. So if Scotland wants to leave a devolved United Kingdom and be part of a European Union, it won't be independent, it'll be a satellite of Brussels. And really that, I think, is where the debate ought to be framed.
Christine, a satellite of Brussels?
Well, I'm more concerned that we're a satellite of Westminster just now, because Scotland has no reputation. Hang on a sec. Scotland has no representation in Europe, no representation over fishing. We have huge oil reserves, gas reserves, renewable energy. We have no clout within Europe, and we will have when we're independent and a member of Europe. Now, the second point you make about that you wouldn't be independent, is he claiming that all the other member states of the European Union are not independent? Sovereignty is not absolute. Nations share sovereignty in United Nations. They share it in the European Union by consent and by representation. What Mr. Farage wants is, I think it's England, because he can't speak for Scotland, to just be isolated from the world and isolated from Europe. Scotland is outgoing, unlike Mr. Farage.
Well, I'm sorry.
Nigel.
I'm sorry. If you want independence, and I believe that is the word that your party's been campaigning for, you cannot be independent and a member of this European Union, especially the one that Mr. Barroso outlined yesterday, and arguing to have clout around the table, well, I would say, what's the point of having clout when your voting rights as Scotland would be about 2.5% of the total votes? But arguing to have influence in Brussels is not the same thing as arguing you can be an independent country, because, as you know, as an EU member, all EU law and all EU court judgments are supreme over yours.
Drew Smith, do you think the EU is a democratic union? What benefits does Britain have from being in it?
Well, I believe in the European Union and I believe in Britain's membership of the European Union. But the reality is that our membership of the United Kingdom means that within Europe we have certain opt-outs, for example, on the euro. Britain's membership of the EU is not conditional on us being members of the euro. We're not part of Schengen. We don't need to be part of the European Common Border Scheme. And the problem that has now been identified today for the SNP with the potential of having to negotiate our membership is that all of these things will again be up for grabs. And as Nigel Farage says, Scotland's voice around that table will not be as powerful.
Christine, what would be the sense in leaving one union to join another, more remote one?
Well, first of all, we haven't got any voice just now, and the idea that to have English ministers representing Scottish fishermen is a nonsense.
Well, Christine Graham seems to want to share sovereignty with everyone but London.
Hang on. Let me finish. No. The thing about the European Union is that nations are interdependent on certain issues. Independent on others, we control our tax, our benefits, we control our foreign policy. We would be independent. Well, nations have to negotiate between each other.
Christine, Norway, across the sea from you, is an independent nation, and she has a 200-mile exclusive economic fishing zone. You, as a member of the European Union, whether it's part of the UK or on your own, have exclusive fishing up to 6 miles. That gives you some idea of the power that an independent country could have.
Christine, I'm glad you mentioned Norway. I'm glad you mentioned Norway because it's got its great oil fund with billions in it.
Talk about
Christine, would the SNP entertain the prospect of leaving the EU to become a truly independent state like Norway?
The position of the Scottish National Party is to be a member of the European Union.
What is your position,
Christine? We've been a member of the European Union for a very long time.
Christine, I'm asking your personal opinion. Would you consider the possibility of exploring the option?
I'm fully content with the party's position of being members of the European Union.
But the SNP's position of what independence seems to change all the time. And the closer we get to the referendum, the more the position changes.
Christine, very briefly. We're running out of time. Very briefly.
I mean, to go back to the point that Drew Smith has to deal with, an independent Scotland and the rump of the United Kingdom will be in exactly the same position.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us on Scotland Tonight. Now, Scotland's Olympic.
We aim to supplant and replace the Liberal Democrats, and we will be the third biggest party in British politics. That is the task ahead of us.